Hey, Bakari.
Hey, Shalise, how's it going?
It's so good. How are you?
All
Oh,
right.
Joy.
So I
Oh,
officially thought
is
you were
Joy
waiting on
here?
me.
The crew's back together. All
Hey,
right,
Bakari.
so we
Thanks
are
for
we are
hosting this,
ready
by
to
the way.
say what?
I said thanks for hosting this.
Yeah, no problem. Um, so we're gonna go ahead and get started. It's 11:15. So the first thing I wanted to do is welcome you all to our. I think this is our first. I'm not sure, but in my mind, our first front end technical Q&A. Um, uh, just to quickly go over, some people are messaging me. That's why I keep looking to the right while I'm hosting here. But I've invited three of my dear friends that I've worked with at different companies. Ernesto, I worked with at Course Hero, is a great friend and fellow developer. Shalise, also again, great friend and a mentor that's been a mentor to me. Joy, again, great developer, has moved on to Airbnb. So we're looking forward to hearing about her adventures. So I wanted to go over some quick meeting norms. If you could please stay muted until you've been called on to speak. We have a lot of people scheduled to join this Zoom call. We're expecting around 100 at least. So we've got lots of questions. We've got about 31 questions the last time I looked at Slido to get through. So you can submit thank you, Brian Crawford. Brian Scott, he posted the Slido link for the questions. You can still submit questions. You can upvote questions if you think that question is important, and we will try to get to that, time permitting. When I ask a question, I will let any panelist answer the question. If no one speaks up, either I'll answer it or I'll just pick on one of them. So some of you may be wondering who I am. I know I just joined App Academy, so just a quick introduction. I am a PTM, or Principal Technical Mentor. I am overseeing the February online cohort. We are just behind the January cohort part there that you might see on the screen. I have worked at a number of companies. I've worked in the gaming industry. I have a background in physics, in music, and then I actually switched to software development and worked at 23andMe. I worked at PlayStation. I worked at Course Hero, worked at Roblox. So have a passion for both teaching and coding. So these are some people that I met kind of along the way. I am going to give them a chance to introduce themselves, just to take a couple minutes, just to say who they are, talk about their interests and maybe a little fun fact about themselves. So we'll start with Ernesto.
Hello. So yeah, work with Bakar in Course Hero. It's good to be here, seeing all of you guys. I'll preface this with saying that I've spoken at other bootcamps or similar events before, so I know what it is like to be at that final stage of graduating or being about to be on the job hunt and so on and so forth. Very stressful, lots of questions. So hopefully we can get some of those answers out today. And even after this, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn, send me a message. I'm always more than happy to connect and answer anything else that we don't have time for today. But yeah, I'm Ernesto. I'm a front-end developer at Course Hero. And fun fact about me, I like mechanical keyboards. I like building them piece by piece. Sounds kind of weird, I know, but it's sort of a hobby, and um, takes my mind away from other things that are just like code, code, code. So yes, that's a great subreddit right there. Whoever posted in the chat. Favorite switches. Right now I have 3 custom mechs. I'm rocking Telios, Xylens, and also some Tangerines. So those 3 would be my top choice at the moment. Holy pandas are good too.
The chat's just going crazy here. Calm down, chat. Okay. So thank you, Ernesto. Yeah, he's a great React front end developer. So like he said, if you want to connect with him on LinkedIn, he's open to that. We are going to move on to Shalise.
Hi, I'm Shalise. I currently work at 23andMe. I am now a team lead for our Health Interactive team. So that is work related to genetics and health and stuff about you to try and help you live your healthiest life. I was previously a big Microsoft Technologies developer. So I did a lot of C#. I did some VB.NET. I worked with classic ASP. And then I found the light and came to JavaScript. And so now I work with lots of JavaScript, lots of React, also Python, Django, etc. And yeah, a fun fact about me is that I like to do costume makeup. So on Halloween, it is a lot of fun for me, and I really like to freak people out because I kind of look gross most of the time, and it's amazing. Okay, that's me.
And Joy.
Hello, I'm Joy. So I actually went to App Academy 4 years ago now. And so I was working in Boston. I moved to the West Coast to attend App Academy in San Francisco, graduated, job hunted, and then ended up signing with 23andMe, where I was at for about a little over three and a half years-ish, maybe over 3. So at 23andMe, I was a full stack software engineer. So Python, Django, JavaScript, React. I was on the Ancestry team for about 2.5 years. And then I was on the health team for a little over half a year, and that was with Shalise. Yeah. And then, so more recently, I've switched over to Airbnb, which is based in SF. So at Airbnb, still full stack, although I've been, like, as of late, mostly focused on front end. So as you know, Airbnb is a much larger company and like repos and everything. So they have many technologies, but their front end is mostly JavaScript, React, and then back end is Java, Ruby, and a ton of kind of home built things. Yeah, fun fact about me. So the improv team that I'm on actually performed in our first festival show last weekend via the Anywhere Improv Festival. So that is still online if you want to track it down. But it was fun for us, and it's been a great way to stay in touch while everything is digital.
All right, thank you, panelists, for giving us those great intros and giving us a little bit of a window into your soul. We are going to move on to the Q&A because that's what people are really here for. So first question, is your company moving away from Redux in favor of hooks? And then the second part of it is, what's your favorite way to manage state? So is your company moving away from Redux in favor of hooks? And what's your favorite way to manage state? So anyone can take that.
I can say words. I can do that. Sure. Okay. So I want to say, first of all, in response that, like, not every company uses Redux. So in our case, for example, at 23andMe, only a very small part of the code base is using Redux at all. So moving away from is maybe not the exact phrase, but the thing that's kind of important to remember is that Redux is about having like global state, things that are going to be used throughout disparate single page apps or components, et cetera. And it's really good for scale, but we don't necessarily do that kind of scale in terms of our React components at 23andMe. We do a lot of more modularized components that are used throughout an existing app. So that means that a lot of the times it's just perfectly reasonable to use React state on its own, which is what hooks is like under the hood. So I think that generally when I first started working in this space, there was a lot of sort of like React and Redux go hand in hand, and you really should be using Redux if you ever want to do state management. And I think that that's not exactly true any longer. I think that a lot of people have recognized that for small and even medium-sized projects or features, it's perfectly reasonable to use React itself. So long, of course, you are doing like a lot of paying attention to performance and like additional re-renders and making sure that your state is actively immutable and you're not doing anything silly, and you are sort of like understanding the whole intent behind it, then I think that it's just fine. So with that said, my favorite way to manage state, most of the time I usually just start with React state and use hooks where possible. And as soon as things start getting to a point where I need to care a lot more about performance or about global state or sharing state, then that's when something like Redux or one of the other state management systems and frameworks that exist now, which I don't know what the best one is at this point. That's where that comes in.
Okay, awesome. Great answer. Yay. Woohoo.
But if anyone else wants to answer too, like, please feel free. I'm not like, you know, the...
I would say Airbnb was very strong into Redux before, and we are moving towards React hooks and more pure functional components. This transition kind of started before I joined, so I wasn't necessarily part of the discussion for why. For me personally, I think it makes sense because there's a lot of stuff. Because there's so many teams and so many different projects and pages, we try to keep things more separated. So yeah. And a lot of stuff is server-side rendered. And there are a lot of kind of custom built packages for things that maybe everyone wants. So for example, to get the current user, someone has just built a service that is Airbnb current user. Like, yeah.
Awesome.
I'll add my piece to this. So a quick brief history on this. It's for a while now. The reason why you may see online or in tutorials or when you read or whatever that Redux has been falling out of favor, it's really just because of two reasons. One, because of hooks, but even prior to that, because of context. When React released the context API a while back, actually, funny enough, Redux, the very first versions of Redux, all the way from the beginning, were built using context under the hood. This is what the API that enabled Redux to behave the way it does. Now, more modernly, the new context API, especially with hooks, provides just a very concise way of accessing the similar things to what Redux does. And then the other reason why Redux in a way has been sort of falling out of favor is because when you set up Redux, there is a lot of also ceremony that you have to do with other things.
Mm-hmm.
Redux doesn't just go by itself. People usually do thunks or sagas or cycles. And then next thing you know, you have this ecosystem of tools tied around managing state that then become a bit burdensome when you're onboarding somebody. And then you have this cognitive overload over doing these things, right? In general, personally, what I do and what I always, I've worked on really large code bases. Like on my previous company, prior to Course Hero, the front end that we built was over 300,000 lines of code, just front end alone, split into many different like UIs and services. It was great, it was clean, but it was just a very big product. At Course Hero now, on the team that I lead on the front end, it's much smaller. But even for either case, whether it is a large scale or a small scale, my recommendation always is you start with just regular hooks, regular state, and you try to be as clean as you can when setting up those states. The trick is always don't make this huge trees of state, of big objects or arrays or whatever. Keep things as concise as you can so that you follow this single responsibility principle as closely as you can, right? When you extract a lot of components, instead of having a huge component, that means that typically you're going to have less state to manage in those individual components, right? Which is makes just life easier in general. And then when you reach that point where you really find that you're passing too many props down, that you have a component that's being used by too many other clients, then you can reach for something like context. And if beyond that you have any other specific needs, then yes, maybe Redux is the right choice, or even something else entirely.
All right, those were great answers. You guys really covered it. The next question says 1, algorithms and data structures versus JavaScript, HTML, CSS versus 3, modern front-end frameworks in ecosystem. How and what should a front-end job seeker be prioritizing or other things? So the first was algorithms and data structures. 2 was JavaScript, HTML, CSS. And then the third was like modern front-end frameworks and ecosystem. Like for a job seeker, what should they be prioritizing, or should they be prioritizing some other things?
Yeah, I can at least answer based on my kind of most recent job hunt, as well as 4 years ago when I graduated from App Academy. So when it comes to frameworks, if you list it on your resume, then it is helpful. It is good for you if you're able to deeply explain various parts of it. If you don't list it on your resume, then they don't expect you to know about it. So I wouldn't necessarily just glancingly read up on a bunch of things, although you should have like a general knowledge. But the most important part is like, if you're saying that you know React and Redux, like be able to talk about everything. Component lifecycle, like DOM, CSOM, just everything in depth in a conversational manner. I'd say for front-end specific interviews, often you're asked to build something. So be it like a modal, a tooltip, various like a form, like there you can kind of Google like front-end interview questions, and they'll have a lot of standard lists. So I would say go down through that, be able to code it up on your computer where it works, practice in JS Fiddle, and then like write it so many times that you're able to write it from memory without thinking too hard, including CSS, HTML, and all the hooks and all that. Then be able to write it on paper, like with pen and paper, with no reference to syntax or text editor or anything. I would say algos and data structures, depending on where you're interviewing, you should definitely be able to solve them. So it depends on the company. Like some companies will ask you to debug stuff. Some companies will like have you pair program. Some companies will have you do a take home and build something within 24 hours, but 24 hours always takes longer than 24 hours. So like, so data structures, algorithms, I would say you want to be able to recognize all of the common ones and I think App Academy teaches a fairly good approach to how to answer those questions. So practice those enough that you feel confident.
Yeah, I would +1 everything Joy said. Also, definitely, for sure, I want to reinforce that you should expect to be asked some algorithm data structure questions. Even if you're going for a front-end developer position, or even if you're going for, say, like a web developer position, a lot of the times some companies are looking to know what the boundaries of your knowledge is. So it's possible that they'll ask you this without like expecting you to be able to answer it completely, but they are hoping that you're going to be able to talk through it, sort of like be able to verbalize what it is that you're thinking, ask follow-up questions, stuff that like shows that you understand what it is that they're asking, or at least are trying to. So definitely spend time like getting to feel more comfortable with those questions generally. There is like Cracking the Coding Interview, that book, and also Leak Code are good resources just to like practice. And to be fair, I just want to say, if you are using those resources, particularly Leak Code, there are questions that are asked that are extremely difficult, and do not let them totally destroy your confidence, because it's really okay if you can't answer every single one. That's it.
Plus 100%. The other thing, it's also practice on your own, even if it's just to say that you pick up a lit code question or whatever exercise that you're doing. Just lock yourself in a room and out loud, just imagine that you're in an interview setting and actually say it, because when you hear yourself out loud, you realize a lot of things that could sound better, questions that you could be asking. and I found that effective for me. I know it's kind of crazy, but it works, trust me. And then the other thing is build as many things as you can, especially for front-end related interviews. There's always going to be a piece that is going to ask you about this creative side of front end, right? Whether that is, hey, how did this two different components work, or how would you, make an API call and render a list in the UI, and then how would you select these things? Those are very common, like kind of like interview questions that they do. And then sadly, yes, there's a good chance that there will be some algo question, especially in Silicon Valley. That's still true, even if what they're asking you has nothing to do with what you will do at the job. But unfortunately, yeah, you just gotta read up a bit on it and do your best. But ask tons of questions and just show them that you're listening and that you care.
All right, awesome. We are going to move on. The next question is from Gary Busey. After graduating from a boot camp or a university, how prepared were you for interviews? How advanced were the questions regarding theories, algos, and backend?
Okay. So just to preface, I went to like a small state school in Connecticut, and they had a computer science program that like I learned much more, I thought, in my internship. But I'm gonna say that when I was first going into interviews, I didn't know anything, and I was really overconfident, to the point where I realized like now the questions that I was being asked, I was like almost defensive about. So I want to just say that like there may be a psychological aspect in relation to like going into an interview. And I just wish that I had spent a lot more time being okay with being wrong about stuff, and like being okay with trying to just get to an answer without getting flustered. So I think I like didn't focus enough on that part, which I have a feeling App Academy probably does do stuff related to that, but I can't speak for sure. And then how difficult were the questions? Some of them were really tough. And then I had other interviews that were like absolutely no technical questions. And the only thing I was asked was like, what does a certain PHP function do? So I think it really depends on where you're interviewing. And again, I'm from Connecticut, so that is not a technical space. Like the developer jobs that I was going for were not on the level of Silicon Valley. So I don't know how helpful that is, but just there's my answer.
Yeah, I'd say based on my experience when I graduated, I think App Academy does a very good job of teaching you the things you need to know to be able to teach yourself. So they definitely don't cover like all of the material that you will need to know to interview well, but they get you started. And so, for example, like when I went through the program, we had a couple different data structures and algorithms lectures. To me, it was like good because then it gets your foot in the door of like, oh, okay, like I kind of understand the concept of these, but then it's on you to like continue looking and like reading up more, and like actually implementing. Like every time you do an interview, like always talk about big O little O notation, always talk about time complexity, space complexity, looking up new algorithms, and yeah, and just like because I think like we spent maybe a couple days on CSS. But when you interview, you just have to know how to write it, right? Which is not something you can just learn in a couple days necessarily. I think one of the biggest values that I would like strongly recommend leveraging is, especially right now, because you have a cohort of people who are all in the same boat. Like everyone is job hunting. Everyone is trying to learn the same things, is like really utilizing each other. So with practicing interviews, like we would practice with each other all the time. Like every day, every afternoon, you'd practice maybe 2 different whiteboarding problems. anytime someone came back from an interview, be it a technical or an on-site or whatever, like we talk about what questions were asked and then like maybe they got it on the interview, maybe they didn't. And then we'd like talk about it and try to figure out how you would solve it. And kind of having that arsenal of questions that you have seen and possible solutions. And then practice like writing it yourself, I think is very valuable. So, because for this recent round of interviews, it's harder because like once you're working, it's harder to get people to practice with you just because like we're not all job hunting right now, right? But I had a friend and he like cracked open cracking the coding interview and asked me one of the questions. While I was interviewing, 2 separate interviewers asked me a very, very similar question. So to me, I was like, oh shoot, like it's a good thing I did this with my friend and like botched it then. And then both of us like figured it out and discussed different ways to solve it. So that when the real time came and actual interviewers were asking me, I already had a sense for how maybe I should solve it, or how a good way to solve it would be. Yeah.
Awesome, great answers. We're actually gonna move on to the next question. I have an interview for a full stack front end focused role. Not me, this person. I have an interview for a full stack front end focused role, which will be technical expertise plus culture fit, no live coding. What questions should I expect?
Maybe system design. So at least in my experience and interviewing folks, if there's no live coding, a lot of the times that means you might be talking about like how would you design a system to do X? So some of the often asked questions in this case are like, how would you re-implement Bitly or another URL shortener? And so that doesn't expect you to actually write any code or to finish a prototype, but it does expect you to be able to talk through some of the systems you might need and then how they would interact with one another. And as for the other things that I have experienced in that, sometimes just trivia. So like what does this do? What is like Joy was mentioning earlier, what is the component lifecycle in React? Stuff that is attempting to figure out what you already know about, and this is just trivia. I should have just said trivia and left it at that. So that's my thought.
Yeah, +1 to all of that. I'd also say probably be very ready to discuss all of your technical background, so previous projects, previous jobs. Yeah, because one thing people tend to like is that you are able to speak intelligently and deeply and thoroughly about the things that you've worked on. Yeah.
Awesome. And moving to the next question. As you can see, I'm trying to move us along here because we've got lots of questions, which is cool. Can you walk through your current average day? How is your daily routine different in past companies? And how much of the process do you own?
So this varies place by place. You'll find a lot of places where you have a lot of autonomy from the beginning. A lot of this is largely dependent also on how the team is structured, what sort of product manager is in place as well. For in my team in particular, I'm fortunate that I have an excellent product manager, and we also have a dedicated designer. And so between the 3 of us, we try to work very cohesively to achieve like this common goal, which is just shipping some feature. But there will be tons of places where you do not have, I guess, that luxury in a way. And maybe the UX designer is shared amongst different teams. Maybe they just cannot dedicate 100% of their time to your feature in particular. But at the end, what's helped me before and what I've suggested to other people is that remember that you're all working as a team to a common goal, and that you as a developer, you want to have as much resources as you can in order to build the features that you need to build. And never, ever, ever, if there's one thing that you would take away from what I'm saying is try your hardest to not just ship code or build something, because anyone can do that. Understand what it is that you're building, understand the use cases for it, so that you can see how a user is going to use your stuff. And then you can, when you're building the code, you can think through all the edge cases and minimize the bugs that you're going to ship into production, and really just create a very nice experience for the user in general. If you follow that path, usually you'll be okay, I think.
Normal day, a lot of pull request review. Usually that's what I start with, reviewing stuff related to current projects, answering some questions or asking questions on technical review documents, and then lunch, and then some coding, some slacking, some socializing. And in the sense of socializing just for whatever common project we're on. Yeah.
Do you start the day with a stand-up usually?
No, I don't. I do sometimes have a stand-up at some point during the day, but it's usually pretty quick. I do not usually start with a stand-up. I have at previous companies, but they were extremely strict about following Scrum. So I think it depends on the organization and how much of a process they're trying to follow.
I was asking because I remember starting it every day with a stand-up when I was there. So it's interesting that you're not.
Look at that. Different teams.
Yeah, different teams in the same company. Amazing.
Yeah, I'd say, I guess mine's pretty similar. So I've always been an IC, an individual contributor. So yeah, we have stand up at 11. Because we've been mandatory work from home for like 3 months now, our stand up is now more of a social hang time. Yeah, I mean, we talk about work, and then we very quickly talk about other things. I'd say how much kind of control do you have over what you work on or process or all of that? Because Airbnb is much larger, I think things are a lot more segmented. So for example, just content. So one of our designs, we were missing specs for like a certain pathway, right? And like all of the resources were kind of constrained. So then we as engineers ended up just writing content. But then per like company policy, like actually a PM or designer is supposed to write it. And then I don't know, there were like a lot of hoops you have to jump through. So things can get a little slow because of that. And then, yeah, things, because there's kind of so many levels, due dates have to be percolated up and down pretty, like it takes a while. And then like it goes up and then it goes down to this other person. And so that can be a limiting factor. So if something is done and like they need someone to do it, then and you have the skills, like you're allotted to do it kind of thing. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you, guys. The next one, what can I do now, not having a CS degree or any degree, to prepare for the job search?
Work on your own, building as many projects as you can. I think there's a common trap that I've seen a lot of people follow, and that is that it's very easy to just keep on watching YouTube videos about code or tutorials on Udemy, or reading articles on Medium and guides and all this. But when you actually cement that knowledge is when you go and build something for yourself. So it's great to read and follow resources and learn as much documentation as you can and syntax and so on and so forth. But I would say take most of the time and just put down the code and build something. It doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be a groundbreaking feature. It can be something very small, tiny. But build that, ship it to your GitHub so you have some activity there on your GitHub, which is also something you can show to interviewers that you're doing. And get yourself familiar with the tools and the ecosystem. And the more you do, believe me, when you're in that interview setting and you're nervous and your brain inevitably starts to forget things, all that practice is going to come back because you've actually been doing it for a while, right? So if you do that, really, like that's fine. Like I myself, I dropped out of college. I don't have any formal education, 100% self-taught. But that's really just the best way that you can do it. Just work on projects as if you were working day to day, because when you're hired, that's exactly what you will be doing.
Yeah, I definitely +1 all of those things. Also, make sure your portfolio looks like hella nice. Because I think like that is the only example that you have to show the people looking at your resume that you know how to code, or just what you know. Because I think for me, like my portfolio was part of what caught people's eye. So I rebuilt Facebook and then rebuilt like some other things. Yeah, and then make sure your resume looks good and like looks well put together, and it's not just like random text, random places. And then networking, so reaching out on LinkedIn and like pinging people. You'd be surprised by how many people who are random strangers are actually open to random people pinging them and then giving them a referral. So part of it is because you get a referral bonus. And so some people just don't care. They're like, all right, I'll take a referral bonus. Like if you get it or you don't get it. Yeah, and then also reaching out within your own network is usually more helpful. But
Excellent, excellent. You guys are just wonderful. So this next question is, I have trouble determining my self-worth as a programmer. What I can offer others as a developer? What measuring sticks do you use to self-evaluate?
There are a lot. And I'm not going to say almost anything related to tech. So like my biggest thing is, have I helped make my team and organization better? Does that mean that I ask good questions? Am I helping people? Do I mentor others about things that I know? Do I waste time? And by wasting time, I mean like spending too much time not asking for help when you maybe just don't understand what's going on. I've myself gotten into these spirals where you already don't maybe have too much confidence, and then you're not sure what the hell is going on in this code, and then you're just trying to like brute force it. And ultimately, the best thing that I think I can do is to help others understand what I know and what I don't know, so that I can get help and then give it when I need to. So that, and then also, do I ship things on time? I do try and make sure that as much as possible, I am like being honest in my understanding of what I can do and the time frame that I need. I often was very optimistic constantly, and that led to me being like late for a lot of things. And it's great if you have the nice consideration of wanting to do well, but ultimately you do have to stick to what it is that you're committing. And so spending time to make sure that you understand how you work and like how quickly you can be, or quick you can be. So a lot of it is, like I said, not technical necessarily, but about how you work with others, how you help build the teams that you're on. You know, make sure that you're honest and forthright about the stuff that you're doing, and how fast you can move. And, you know, overall, am I making this organization better?
Okay, next question. What do you see as some emerging trends in the front end world? What are some new technologies that you think will become essential in 1 year or 5 years?
Probably service workers, web workers, a lot more stuff that's more like real time and immediate. Performance is huge. And lastly, you are going to have to be accessible no matter what. If you want to work at a company, you will have to write accessible front-end code. People will need to be able to use a keyboard to work with your feature. So that's not just like, I mean, it is an important moral thing, like people should have empathy for their users, right? But realistically, with the legal like space that we're in right now, the only way that people have to try and get companies and features to perform within the legal ADA is to sue people, like sue organizations. So it is an extremely like lucrative and like in the news sort of coming up thing that is never going to go away. So I just want to push as much as possible to make sure that you are understanding accessibility and making sure that you think about that stuff as you go.
Yeah, I would plus like 100 on that one. We have an entire team basically dedicated to making sure all of our components are accessible. I don't know how much they've taught you about accessibility, but I would recommend looking up like semantic HTML, then A11Y. So ALI with 1 and accessibility internet.
Yeah, accessibility is key. One more thing I would add to that, I think for the past like at least like just very few years, the front end space has been very stable compared to how it was before in prior years, where it was chaotic. It's still chaotic and moves at a very quick pace, but right now there's a solid trend that everybody's using React. Inside the React ecosystem, there's solid patterns already tried and prove and tested and all that. I would say one thing that's been picking up steam for a long time and is only going to continue getting stronger is 1 TypeScript and 2 GraphQL. Those will guaranteed 200% be things that are in the future. Last year alone, I know the surveys was the year of TypeScript, for example. This year, GraphQL continues to pick up pace, and more companies are actually in there. So those 2 things I would invest. But for now, honestly, especially when you're coming out of a bootcamp and all this, I would focus really on the foundation, core JavaScript, core front end and React, and understanding those principles. That knowledge will then, when you were going to learn something else in the future, it'll be there. It's the same concept, right? It's just different technologies, different syntax.
Awesome. Thank you, panelists. Next question. Are most developers, we're going to kind of go to the speed round now because we have only a few minutes left. Are most developers in your company niche to a certain task, or do they float around the front end, back end? Please, 20 seconds or less.
Depends on what they want to do.
Yeah, same. Depends on what they want to do and whether they speak up about wanting to switch or stay the same.
In some companies, you'll have the luxury of being dedicated to front end or back end. And some others, especially startups, you'll need to be full stack. So it depends on the place.
Awesome. What is considered a good project, good in quotes, air quotes, for displaying to recruiters and hiring managers? Example for a startup and one for a top tier tech company, please. Thanks.
Not a to-do list. So something that is like more logic than that, and ideally something that you can speak a lot about why you made decisions and how you made them just deeply. Joy was talking about this earlier. Also, have a really nice portfolio.
Yeah, basically what Shalise said, of you want enough interesting stuff that you're able to say interesting things about it when they ask, and you want it to, like, it has to look nice, like visually look nice.
And work. It's got to work. Side note.
Yes, that's very important. It's got to work. What are the most marketable skills to know if you want to become a front-end engineer? 20 seconds or less.
You know the answer to this. Lots of JavaScript, lots of React, just lots of front end in general. Consume that like it's water every day. Spend hours and hours at a time. Just do it. Those 2 things will get you the knowledge and the job.
Yeah, grit.
I'd say something to showcase is being adaptable and like the way you discuss with your interviewer. Since one thing they're interviewing you for is like do they want to work with you? And so like being a nice person who like takes feedback and provides potentially your own feedback in a like not condescending, rude way and stuff like that. And like the way you express opinions, I think is helpful to keep in mind.
Are there any front-end frameworks you recommend learning in addition to React?
Focus. Don't, especially at this time, don't be switching to so many things. Just focus on one. Pick one, which is the more marketable one and the one that's going to pay you better and get you the job and give you more opportunities, which just happens to be React. Learn it really well. And in the future, if something better comes along, the same knowledge will transfer.
Yeah, I would definitely say that in addition to just frameworks, and this comes back to a little bit what Ernesto was saying earlier. It's like you have to have a good foundation of what the language is. And so knowing some of the newer pieces of functionality in like ES6, for example, like, and some of the more like prototype, oh my God, what's the word? Anyway, it doesn't matter. In ES7, you want to make sure that you understand a lot of this new stuff. You might get asked like, what is something new that you think is cool or what have you? Okay, that was too long.
Also be able to write everything in raw, just raw vanilla JavaScript and jQuery Ajax, because I think Google does not let you use React or any other framework. And then there might be some other companies like that.
That's because Google is all in on Angular. So
I do know for a fact that Google uses React within their company on different projects, but in their interview process, I think it's a little bit different. But yeah, they do use Angular and React. If you have been responsible, involved in hiring a teammate, what advice could you give for bootcamp grads to distinguish themselves and get past the resume phase?
My biggest thing, and I've hired quite a few folks, but my biggest thing is always if I feel like I can pair program with you. So I do a lot of questions that surround like talking through a problem. And if I am met with either arrogance or like inappropriate jokes, like not that that has happened that much, but it has, you know, those interviews are over. Mostly what you want is to show that you have, like you can connect with somebody and you can talk with them about a problem. Ultimately, everyone wants to be able to like solve issues creatively, right? So you need to be able to work with others to do that. So myself personally that is the thing that I really, really look for over almost anything else. I mean, to be fair, they have to be able to, you know, answer technical questions as well. But if they're a great technical person, but they're terrible to talk to, they're not getting hired.
Plus one tool that the other thing I've built the teams before and whatnot, and have interviewed bootcamp grads, and the one thing that aside from having those like personality chops, which are really important because you're going to be in a team, you got to be able to collaborate with people, right? Show that you're passionate, that you care about some piece of technology. There's just so much, especially in the front end alone, that you can pick and be passionate about. And then don't just say that you're passionate about it, back it up. Have projects that you worked on. Show me your GitHub, show me your code. It's like a lot of people say code wins arguments, right? And so a lot of the times if you're telling me that you want to do something that you want to work with me or whatever, show me what you've been doing leading to that moment. That even for people that are not bootcamp graduates that I've interviewed that have 10 years of experience, they still do not do, and they fail the interview. Simple thing.
Yeah, I'd say for just getting your foot in the door and getting them to respond to your resume. In my experience, the first time I was applying, there's some companies that just will not hire bootcamp grads. And that's just kind of a thing. And I figured there's not really much I can do about it. So I apply to everyone. If they are open to bootcamp grads, then they look at mine. If they're not, then they don't. Or for example, some companies, like it's based on their experience with having hired bootcamp grads. So maybe they'll only hire people from this bootcamp, but not these other ones. So for me, like, it's like, like, don't worry and stress too much about it. Do the same thing you would do normally, which is just apply anyway. And the only thing that can maybe help you is if you have an inside person who you can ping and like have it be a warm referral rather than a cold resume drop.
Next question, how does app.slido prevent users from voting multiple times using an incognito browser if technically it doesn't store information? How does it keep state? That's a very interesting question.
Database. If you're using incognito and it's still persisting those things, my first guess would be just open it up in incognito, open the network tab on Chrome or Firefox, and every time you hit that +1, let's see if a request is being made. And if it is, you know that's being persisted in the database, and the moment the user session loads in, it's going to pull that information and it's going to populate the state in the UI.
Yeah, my answer is I don't know. I would have to look at it. But that's
Yeah.
a really great place to start.
Yeah, I was gonna say I was gonna do the same thing. I'd open the network tab. I'd open up, maybe even open up React tools and see if I can see anything.
They're storing it somewhere, so even in incognito, one of the things is that local storage doesn't work, cookies don't work, all those things, so they gotta persist somewhere.
Yeah. Do front end? Okay, this is a question. Do front end jobs pay as much as back end jobs? Also, is back end generally considered to be more complex or harder work than front end, and why? And that's why the pay is more.
So I think the second question is kind of answering the first one by saying that there is an assumption that back-end jobs pay more. I don't know that that's true. I think that most of the time that sort of like split between front end and back end, at least in my career, it hasn't really existed formally. A lot of the times it's full stack engineers who have a preference towards one way or the other. I want to admit that I do think there are people who hold sort of these, I think, older ideals about like what's real programming. But I don't really want to work with those people because there's just the same amount of potential logic and the need to understand the environment. And if you look at what a browser does, it's so magical and incredible and like fantastic that I think there's just as much to learn there than say like on a server or what it is that the web specifically does. I don't know that it's 100% true all the time. And in answer to your actual question, yeah, that's the answer. Thanks.
Yeah,
thanks
I'm also with Shalice. I don't know if that backend necessarily pays better. I actually, in my company, for example, like since we've moved away to hiring front-end specific roles for the past year or so, I can tell you for a fact that it's very, very challenging to find front-end specific roles. Like they're in high demand right now. And so maybe that even translates to having a better salary for front-end roles in the future, who knows? But what I'm saying is that don't feel discouraged. There's a need for both back-end people and front-end people all the time. And same for full stack if that's what you fancy. Also for those curious, I checked the Slido thing. They do make network calls every time. And then just on the URL, they send a question ID with a like, and that's how they tie it to the backend.
I'd like to add also that I've worked both as a back-end developer and as a front-end developer, and there really wasn't a difference in terms of how I was compensated. It wasn't like we're going to pay you this much because you're a front-end or this much because you're a back-end. It was the quality. It was really the quality of you, your interview, and your experience, and then you were leveled based on that, whether it was front-end or back-end.
Yeah, I'd also add on to that. I would pursue the parts and the type of work that makes you the most interested and happy, because the more interested you are and the happier you are working on it, the better you'll do. And then the more productive you are, and then like the more you'll grow. So rather than trying to choose what you want to work on based on your hope for future monetary gains, do it based on what you like.
100%.
What's the relationship between front-end development and UI UX designers?
When you have a good one, it's wonderful. When you have a bad one, it's not as wonderful.
The same for a project manager. It can be a very nice relationship. It can be a not so nice relationship. Yeah.
I will add on that if your UX and UI designers get laid off, that you might end up having to do some of that work. So yeah.
Are you speaking from experience, Joy?
Did you read the news?
Yes.
It's been pretty bad.
Oh
no. Just to kind of add on to that question, could you talk a bit about like the responsibility that a front-end developer has versus a UI UX designer has, like where the lines are, like that relationship?
Yeah, sure. I'm actually the guild master for our front end group. So at 23andMe, so we have a decent amount of designers who attend and participate because they have interest a lot of the times in HTML and CSS, sometimes JavaScript, and so often I find that working with a good UI UX designer, they have curiosity, you know, they're usually pretty receptive to feedback. If you have something that you see that either you don't think looks quite right or you have a suggestion for, they're usually pretty willing to accept whatever it is you say, because a lot of the times you're the one who's coding things and you see what's like best practice across the board. So even though designers are often also trying to make sure that they're on top of everything, you know, like anything else, things can go through the cracks. So I think it's a pretty symbiotic relationship in that respect. And then also designers, you know, when you do have a good designer, it's that trust is really important, because then that means that you get to implement front end like engineering work that is actually really exciting and really cool. And that is very important. So I don't know if that answered your question, but usually designer designs, engineer implements.
All right. Do you have to be artistic / good with tools like Photoshop to be a good front end developer?
I have never used Photoshop.
You definitely do not.
That's the job of the designer.
Yeah, there you go.
Not you.
Exactly. And they don't even
I would
use
say
Photoshop anymore. They use like Illustrator and stuff. Sorry, go ahead, Joy.
I was just going to say one thing to be cognizant of, attention to detail is good. So if a designer gives you a given design, like it is good as an engineer to be able to implement it in a pixel perfect way. So if it says 40 pixels, like don't just do 39 for whatever weird reason, if that makes sense.
100%. And the other thing is that a lot of times you'll find that the tools that designers use, like Figma or Zeppelin or Envision, all these tools that they usually show you like the separation between components and pixels and things like this, but a lot of times it will not be there. So it's up for you and your own interpretation to guess where that is. And that's really where the attention to detail that Joy mentioned comes into play. Like, don't ignore things. Even if it's harder, even if it's annoying, whatever, try to be as close to pixel perfect as you can. And in general, that's just a good exercise. Yeah.
Also, I'll hop in here because I've had this happen in other companies where the designer doesn't have a good handle on the idea of responsive design, of having the design flow between mobile sizes and tablet sizes and desktop sizes. And so there's an opportunity there for the engineer to talk to the designer and work with them and help explain them the technical limitations on what you can do with a design. And that's a good back and forth that you can have between an engineer and a designer to kind of get the user interface to work in a functional way, right, that will function correctly, but also meet their design goals. So
To add on to that quickly to what Bart said, some of the best relationships that I've seen between developer and designer is when the developer is challenging that design. When development is early on involved in the design, instead of you just being handed off some design and then just go code it, if beforehand you tell them, hey, this is not going to work, or what about this, or what about this other thing, you'll see the designer goes back, you send them to the drawing board and they got to make changes. And then in the end, it's going to be better for you because you're going to end up throwing less code away too.
I'm laughing because I'm remembering conversations at Course Hero about that. We have about a minute left, so I'm going to end on this question. And thank you guys so much for your time. Thank you for doing this. You didn't have to. What is your biggest aha moment as a software engineer now that you are out in the field? For example, what is something you didn't know that clicked for you?
I think for me, a big thing is realizing that writing code is more about writing code for other humans to read It's not about how the computer itself interprets it. Because you can write the same thing many different ways, but the point is that another human developer is going to have to read this and know immediately what it's doing. Yeah, so like that's why code golf and all of those other things are not ideal.
I'll say something similar to Joy. For me, it got to a point where it's very easy to think when you're just working on your own, on a project, company or not, by yourself, it's just yourself, right? And then days go by and it's still your code, it's still you're looking at the same things every day. But when you're in a team and 3 months go by after you build something and other people inevitably have to touch that, they're going to touch your code. So you sort of have a responsibility to write maintainable code, to care about what you write, the way you name things, write comments for police write comments. Most of the people that I work with do not, and I have to guess what it is that they do. And so just be mindful of other people in a way, right?
Yeah, so +1 to both of those things. I think I maybe mentioned this before, but I think one of the biggest aha moments of my entire career was when I realized like I was allowed to ask questions, and it's okay if I don't know something. For a long time, I just assumed that I would have to always be able to at least like have heard that word before, and that's not always true. And it's perfectly acceptable. I know that there is kind of a lot of this is like a psychological thing that a lot of folks will experience. You know, that imposter syndrome is a thing, but it's really okay to ask questions. And when you ask questions, you're actually helping other people realize that it's normal. So when you are normalizing things like asking questions or saying you don't know something, it is just showing everybody around you that like this is a perfectly acceptable thing. So that's my big aha moment.
All right, let's give a round of applause for our panelists. Yay! Woohoo! That was pretty awesome. You clapped and you had a clap emoji show up at the same time. Wow.
She's very soon proactive.
I didn't know what to say. I was just like, wow.
Yeah, I spend way too much time in Zoom meetings now, I think.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's true. My whole life is in Zoom, actually. Like I just stopped living in the real world. Like even when I interact with my kids, I'm like, kids, get on Zoom. Your dad needs to talk to you. So anyways, that concludes our front-end technical Q&A. Thank you to Joy, Shalise, Ernesto. Godspeed. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks. Appreciate that.